Here we are in one of the very last old-growth forest patches in southern Ontario, and this is a wild paw paw tree. You can plant these trees underneath the canopy of other trees, creating a multi-storied food production system. They can even grow in the proximity of trees like black walnut, which usually emits a compound called jugulone from the roots, inhibiting the growth of other plants. So this is one of the trees I've been studying in process of writing my next book, because you can incorporate it into a multi-layered, self-sustaining food production system. You can learn more about pawpaw trees in my article on Substack. I'm author of Recipes for Reciprocity, the regenerative way from seed to table. Now here's a little slideshow of a few pictures I took earlier this year in one of the last few patches of old-growth Carolinian Forest in southern Ontario, where I was looking at pawpaw trees at all different stages of their life. I got to see pawpaws growing underneath of shagbark hickory, underneath of tulip trees, underneath of oaks, mixed in with sycamores, and underneath their tall towering canopies, here there was healthy groves of pawpaw trees at different ages, ranging from just a couple years old to well close to 40 or over years old. Some of them were reaching over 50 feet tall, which I've never seen a pawpaw get that tall until I saw them in the wild here. This picture here shows a pawpaw tree, or several of them, growing close to an old-growth American beech. Next, this is a pawpaw leaves looking up into the canopy, seeing the tall trees above. And then moving into the fall pictures, you can see the dramatic yellow foliage on the pawpaw trees, looking up to the almost totally defoliated upper canopy, and the pawpaws still holding onto their leaves, giving it a beautiful color as I was looking from inside of a pawpaw grove up at the other old growth trees above it. Now this gives you a striking image that can actually give you an idea that you can grow multiple food species that are layered on top of each other, like shagbark hickories on top, pawpaws underneath, and then other trees underneath that. I'm going to be going back there to collect some seeds and help those seeds to spread out in that forest and plant them in other forests, so I can help that ancient wild paw paw genetics spread out here in southern Ontario. It's the largest fruit native to North America and the only fruit tree ever to escape the tropics. Thanks to the help of Indigenous horticulturalists over the centuries, we now have access here all the way in southern Ontario to the pawpaw, aka Asimina triloba. This tree is a really amazing tree in the food forest because you can plant it actually in the partial shade of other trees and it still gives you a good amount of fruit. If you check out my post on Substack, you'll find lots of detailed information that's going to help you to be able to source out pawpaw seedlings or grow them all the way from seed yourself. Basically, the tree, when it's younger, from ages like 1 to 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, prefers a bit of a part shade. It actually needs protection from the strong sun. So what I found is that if I can put the seedlings up against a south-facing fence and protect them from the strong sun and just allow some sun to come through the slats of the wood, then they get acclimatized by the time they get 6 feet tall, and then they really go for it in the full sun at year 3 or 4. Pawpaw has a long and illustrious history in American culture, where in the travels of Lewis and Clark, they were eating the fruit. Mark Twain was a favorite of his. And when people escaped the slave plantations and they were going north to Canada, it was a helpful food for them on their journeys. Now, if you've never had a pawpaw fruit before, imagine a fruit the size of a mango that smells like the most tropical exotic fruit. When you cut it in half, you have a rich, sweet, custard-textured flesh that has a flavor profile somewhere between banana, papaya, pear, strawberry, and jackfruit, depending on the variety. Another thing that's really great about this tree is that the foliage and the bark are not desired by deer or rabbits. So where you're facing a lot of pressure from your four-legged friends, they're not really going to pay much attention to your pawpaw seedlings. And in addition to that, where places where they have black walnuts growing and they're exuding that allelopathic chemical jugulone through their roots, suppressing the growth of other plants, pawpaws can actually grow quite well in direct proximity to black walnut trees. Nutritionally speaking, pawpaws are vitamin-packed with antioxidants. Pawpaw pulp contains all essential amino acids and in higher concentrations than apples, bananas, or oranges. It's full of vitamins and minerals, exceeding peaches, grapes, and apples. It is exceptionally high in potassium, calcium, vitamin C, niacin, phosphorus, iron, zinc, copper, and magnesium. The medicinal actions offered by the plant include antimicrobial, antioxidant, anti-proliferative, which means preventing the growth of cancer cells in the human body, cardioprotective, and tonifying properties. This species can grow in cold hardiness zones 4 to 9, and if you are going to try and source out some seeds from a fresh fruit, just make sure you don't let the seeds dry out, because pawpaw seeds, a lot like apple seeds, are called recalcitrant, which means they have to retain their moisture for the embryo to stay alive inside the seed. So if you do harvest the seeds and you want to save them to the following season before planting, you'd want to put them in a fridge in like a moist towel after washing off all the flesh and simulate winter conditions in the fridge before taking them out to warm up for germination. Or you could ideally just plant them right out at the final location where they're supposed to germinate and let them naturally go through the winter cycle. The Latin genus name for this fruit comes from the Ojibwe word for pawpaw, Asimina. Pawpaw's importance to indigenous peoples on Turtle Island is reflected not solely archaeologically, but in folklore and linguistics. There's a town in Louisiana called Natchitoches, which translates to the pawpaw eaters, and is derived from the name given by the Caddo people. Archaeological evidence indicates that indigenous people, such as the Onondaga, introduced the tree to southern Ontario about 400 years ago. George Washington planted pawpaws at his home in Mount Vernon in 1785, and more recently, in 1806, the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition subsisted almost entirely on wild pawpaws for several days. When their party was out of provisions, they had to survive on what was growing locally, and that was the pawpaw fruit. As a shout out to that historical side note of pawpaw history, I'll share one of my favorite acoustic guitar songs in the show notes. If you check out my article on pawpaw trees on Substack, you'll find more elaborated information on the health benefits, as well as all the functions that this tree can provide in the wilderness and in the food forest. You'll also find some fun recipes that you can use if you start to grow your own pawpaws, such as pawpaw ice cream and pawpaw mead.